Hello everyone, this is Florian Munsch for Mining Scout and Goldgeldwelt. I'm honored today to be joined by a representative of one of the top performers in the copper space right now. This is Oroco Resource and Adam Smith, who is responsible for corporate finance and business development, joining me here. And I want to ask Adam some questions about the copper market in general, what's his take, and also dig a little bit deeper into Oroco. Thank you for joining me, Adam.
Thank you, Florian. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Great. So we saw copper having quite a move in the last time. So we just reached 4.5 US dollars per pound. The development is really strong. Some analysts are predicting even higher prices for copper. What's your take?
Well, I think the price may have run ahead of fundamentals. Everyone's aware of the role that copper plays in decarbonization, which is essentially the electrification of the delivery of energy. We're expected to go globally from approximately 20% of end-use energy delivered as electricity via essentially copper to up to 50% of energy delivered, end-use energy delivered as electricity. That represents a tremendous change in the amount of copper that will be required globally. And that narrative has, that story, that development, change in energy use has just started to take place, with the majority of copper demand expected to come over the next few decades as we are set to achieve net zero goals. That narrative has been one that's been talked about for many, many years. It's finally starting to take place. Resources are being committed. Technologies to deliver it are mature enough to now finally be implemented. But the majority, that demand has not yet really hit. So what we're seeing now is likely a result of an underinvestment in copper over the last decade in new copper production, supply chain issues, recovery issues, dollar deflation issues, that sort of thing. So the real wave of copper demand and copper, the deficit between copper demand and copper supplies is yet to hit. So there are some financial considerations here. There's some bets. This is the financial markets moving copper, perhaps, though not to take away from the real tightness in spot copper markets as well. But I think quite simply, right now we're seeing copper prices move ahead of what is going to be a very dire supply-demand deficit going forward. And by the end of the decade, it's going to become very, very interesting to see what happens when, as copper demand starts to really ramp up. It's been said that, and it's pretty easy to run the numbers, that we will use more copper in the next 3 decades than we have in all of industrialized history. And that is happening just at a time, or forecast to happen at a time when some of the world's big copper producers are going to be in decline. For example,
there's been an underinvestment in the copper space as well. So a big system aren't developed, and there is less to be found, and more porphyries coming more important.
Yeah, all of the vectors are going in favor of a tight copper market. Big producers like those in Chile, those mines are decades, generations old in some cases. Chile has to spend approximately $30 billion over the next decade just to keep production static. And that's playing out across the industry's big producers. And over the last decade, 2 decades, even 3 decades, the decline of the discovery of new copper resources has been dramatic. In fact, it's been studied and said that over the last decade, the majority of new copper resources simply have resulted from the lowering of cutoff grade at existing copper deposits rather than the discovery of new copper.
Yeah.
So we're about to enter a phase of increased structural increases in copper usage at a time when we're discovering less and less, dramatically less copper. So it's going to be an interesting time for copper prices and copper production.
Nowadays, when I read about copper, I oftentimes hear the narrative about the electrification and so on, consuming more and more copper, like electric vehicles and so on, being a huge demand driver. How important is that actually? Because we see like developing countries using a lot of copper, of course, as the population gets more and more rich and can afford more things that needs wiring and so on. So how important is the electrification and electric vehicle market really?
Well, good that you mentioned the use of increased amounts of copper as a society gets richer. That's been the driver of copper usage over the last century, really. And if you go back a century, we were using about 500,000 tons of copper metal per year. We're now in the range of 24, 25 million tons. And that's, of course, come through population growth, increased wealth, and technological changes in how society is run. That will continue, of course, and we've got a huge majority of the world's population forecast to increase their living standards and therefore their copper usage. So in the background, there's going to be an increase in copper demand. The change in technologies, the electrification will just increase the rate of change of copper demand. And it is forecast that over the next decade, the electrification simply of the transport networks, electric cars, charging stations, and not to mention the delivery of electricity, the increased generation of electricity and the delivery of that's not even in the equation, but simply cars and electric cars and the charging stations are forecast to consume all of the incremental copper production over the next decade.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's go into Oroco Resource. Oroco, I made a rough calculation, was like a 16.5 bagger or something since March 2020, the big shock there, where everything was depressed. But Oroco clearly is an outperformer in the copper space. Why is that?
Well, we undertook a land assembly process over a 10-year period, which really kicked into gear in 2015 with a legal victory in the Bahamas. Santo Tomás was an asset that had been discovered in the 60s, drilled successively into the 1990s, and by 1994 was the subject of a positive pre-feasibility study by Bateman Engineering.
And sorry to interrupt. So we are talking about copper development in Mexico. And Santo Tomás is the flagship project. It's a huge copper porphyry.
That's right. So unfortunately, there's a relatively long lead-in to the answer to that question, which relates to the rise in the share price. So following the Bateman pre-feasibility, copper prices went into decline. Assets like this were in negative territory in terms of their NPV. Copper prices were quite simply too low, development costs too high. And then around 2001, people started to look out. They were recognizing a decade of underinvestment in copper, discovery and production. And they saw the ascendancy of China. And knowing that China was going to enter that phase, a very copper-dependent phase of economic development, and a number of very bright people predicted that there would be copper deficits and copper prices would rise from, by 2001, they were at century lows in real dollar terms. The owner of Santo Tomás, at that point a Mexican national, did a deal to sell the property. And he unfortunately did a deal with the wrong people who very, very quickly started a dispute with him over the terms of the payment. Around about 2006, 2007, we were approached by him to help him exercise his contractual rights to get the property back. That started a very, very long process, which by 2015 culminated in a victory in a Bahamian court, giving clean title of the property back to the Mexican national. By our arrangement with him, we then had the ability to acquire a majority interest in the property. Oroco's shares started to respond to that. However, pretty quickly it became clear that there were additional problems caused by the defendants in this case that took another 5 years to resolve. So we had this period from 2015 to 2020 When the market was able to see this asset, and they recognized Santo Tomás as a very, very big, potentially valuable copper asset, yet it was mired in an ongoing legal dispute. We were unable to get registered title in the Mexican Public Bureau of Mines until January of last year. So we had this very, very big asset. It was hindered by a legal problem. On the other hand, the share price, as you know, junior mining investors don't invest in legal problems. They invest in exploration and development. So the share price was very low. We had a number of people who thought the arbitrage opportunity there, a very, very valuable asset hindered by a legal problem. They thought that was an interesting equation. They rolled their sleeves up, understood that there was asymmetric risk in our favor in that legal battle. And so the share price started from a very, very low level, lower, I guess, than most exploration companies, because we had this 5 years of uncertainty of title. That is now
a long time, like undervaluation or valuation affected by a negative outlook because of the legal dispute.
Right. So land assembly processes usually take place prior to a company going public. In our case, investors got the benefit of it taking place within a public company. So our shares, during the darkest days, the shares were, 3, 4, 5 cents. The asset is worth, in fact, what it's worth, and the market is recognizing that now. So there's been a tremendous delta between where the shares were back then and where they are today. And then in the last year, obviously January last year, we got clean title, registered with the Mexican authorities. And that was really when we were off to the races. No more legal disputes, no more complicated ownership. And then, of course, COVID hit. And I guess it was February of last year. The realization of what COVID would do to markets came about. And so share prices went down again, just as we started our exploration program. So there's been a lot of opportunities here for investors to get in at very favorable prices. And I think that explains a lot of the rise to today's share price and the large deltas.
Yeah, I understand. So can you tell us a little bit more about Santo Tomás? How was historical data? Do you have like a feasibility study, or in which stage are you actually developing it?
So the 1994 Bateman report took a resource estimate from Mintech of Arizona, metallurgical tests, 3 generations of metallurgical tests from a number of parties, including Mountain States Research, drill data on approximately 100 holes, 30,000 meters into Santo Tomás, and put it together in a resource. Well, the resource estimate was approximately 1 billion tons, containing 7.4 billion pounds of copper. Very favorable metallurgical characteristics, and a very, very favorable location, near to a deep water port, close access to rail. At the time it wasn't, but currently it's high pressure gas pipeline runs nearby. There's hydroelectric power, there's a population, there's a highway. So all the pieces of infrastructure that you need to build a mine like this. And in the Bateman report, that was reflected in very favorable CapEx and OpEx numbers, which would, of course, apply today as well. So that report scoped the production at a rate of approximately 125,000 tons, or 120,000 tons, sorry, per day of ore being processed to produce about 125,000 tons of copper in concentrate per year. In that study, they talked about almost 3 decades of production at that level. And to put that in perspective, 125,000 tons of copper, $10,000 a ton is more or less where the price is now. So this is an operation that was scoped at $1.25 billion of annual revenue for almost 3 decades. So it's a big, it was a big operation. Copper prices used, CapEx figures used in that study. I think if you compare them today, copper prices have probably risen faster than CapEx would have. So the project is even more favorable today than it would have been back then. So our job is to re-drill the deposit. Of course, drilling that's 2.5 decades old is not considered compliant under Rule NI 43-101. So we re-drill We deepen those drill holes because in the past they drilled no deeper than 200, 300 meters.
Means there is exploration upside in depth, or is it also like on the sides?
So starting last September, we conducted a very large 3D IP survey, which is basically a technology. It's a new technology, never applied at Santo Tomás, able to look down to depths of 700, 800 meters plus and detect sulfide mineralization. It's particularly valuable at Santo Tomás because you can correlate the IP results with historical drill results. The survey showed a very strong correlation between what we were finding in the IP and historical drill results, as well as considerable extensions of those favorable results down to depths of the limits of the technology, really 700, 800 meters plus. We were able to see extensions to mineralization, considerable extensions to mineralization, covering an area 3, 4, 5 times even or more of the historical mineralization. So yeah, the potential at Santo Tomás to grow the resource is tremendous.
Okay. Yeah, I think we could elaborate a lot more and talk about the project, but we have limited time, and my intention with this interview is like giving new investors or investors who are not aware of Oroco Resource an introduction. So let's go into the financial situation. Where's the company right now?
So last year we raised approximately $25 million. We have most of that still in our treasury. We've got approximately 20 million in cash right now. There is an additional 16 million in the money warrants, and so we're getting a continual flow of cash in the form of exercise of warrants. So we're in very, very good shape to commence an exploration program. Drill permits have been applied for. The site is being prepared for drilling with drill roads, a workers' camp, water supply, core shack, et cetera, all those things necessary to conduct a drill program, ultimately with multiple rigs turning. We expect drill permits to be received, could be any day. So we are preparing to commence the drill program essentially any day. We'll ultimately be drilling 100 plus holes at Santo Tomás, 100,000 plus meters, covering a very, very large area. The area defined by historical drilling, as well as the IP program, now extends to greater than 5 kilometers north to south, between 1 and 3 kilometers in width. And the favorable IP survey runs off the grid in a number of different locations. So it's a very, very long
re-drilling of the historical holes, and also like extension drilling into depth.
Correct. Because of the historical drilling, we have almost a paint by numbers situation in that we know exactly where to drill, where they got favorable results, and we know from the IP program the approximate additional depth of potential mineralization. So we've got a very, very good guide in the form of historical drill results in the IP program, and that'll help guide the drill program tremendously.
Great. So the next 6 months to 1 year, drill results obviously will be published. So is that what investors can expect from Newsflow?
Yeah, going forward, we'll be very busy with the drill program. Currently, there's an airborne magnetic survey that's being processed. We'll announce the results of that at some point. And then there's continued analysis of the IP program, as well as surface geological mapping and sampling.
Okay, to close the interview, and I think this is a nice question to close. So what is the exit strategy for Oroco?
Quite simply, we would expect there to be interest to acquire Oroco, acquire the asset by way of acquiring the company from majors. They have better balance sheets than they've had in a long time. They've got copper production pipelines that are in many cases that are pretty bare. So there's a number of majors that will need to engage in M&A to replenish their copper production pipeline. Yet there's a very, very limited, probably in the single digits, number of assets out there, large assets in favorable jurisdictions that have a relatively clear path to development. And in a study published a year ago by RFC Ambrian in London, Santo Tomás was identified as one of the 5 assets of that description that is a probable candidate for M&A. So quite simply, it would be the development of Santo Tomás by a major after they acquire it, after they acquire our company.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam. And yeah, so everyone, this is Adam Smith, corporate financing and business development for Oroco Resource. And if you want to find the stock, you can look at the TSX Venture under the symbol OCO. The Frankfurt symbol is OR6, and I will post the WKN as well. So thank you very much, Adam. Have a great day.
Thanks, Florian. It was a pleasure.